Don't think this has really turned out the way I expected. So let's get dripping. All right, just the tip. Dust sheet on the floor can only mean one thing. Today's finally the day. We're taking this primed DMR Sidekick frame and we're going to commence the paint job on it. Now, we're not using actual paint. This has been hit with primer really badly, as you can see, but I don't think it's really going to matter. We've got all the necessary gear here that we need to complete this job, and this is how we're going to do it. I've never used this before. I've only watched 1 or 2 YouTube videos on how to use it, and the ADHD means you kind of can't really get through to the end. However, I think we've got a pretty good idea. So this is alcohol ink. You can see here it's pretty low viscosity, so it's very watery, and it comes in this multitude of colors. I bought it on Amazon a while ago, and it's just been sitting in a drawer waiting for today. I'm going to do a big kind of marble type approach, and I've seen this being done a couple of different ways where people will drop some of the alcohol ink on. So here's a little dry run of how that may look. It matches my sleeve, and you go drop, and then you use an air compressor or a paintbrush and isopropyl alcohol to move it around, and you get a pretty cool effect. Now, I don't have an air compressor, and I don't have a little paintbrush. I do have isopropyl alcohol, but that's not important. What I thought I would do is something a little different. So, instead of an air compressor, I've got my Psych Plus A2 Pro, and I've stuck on the sports ball, football needle attachment, and I'm going to use it to see if I can blow this around. Now, these are good for, a couple of refills of a tire, so I don't expect it to do the whole thing on a single charge. I did charge it up yesterday, so it should be fully charged, but I think it should be quite interesting to see how this goes. Caveat, I have never attempted this, so there is no test panel kicking around. I've never tried to use this in conjunction with it, so we're seeing everything absolutely trial 1.0. So, like I said, dust sheet is down because I only cleaned the floor yesterday, so terrible timing. And yeah, really keen to give this a whirl. So I'll get cracking. I have no loose plan really for the color scheme. I think I'm going to use a lot of colors. And then I also have fresh DMR graphics that I got in from India as well. So let's get into it. So color wise, I reckon I'm going to use most, but probably not all. I definitely want to keep it on the lighter, brighter, and the more kind of vibrant colors. So I might start with one of these blues and see how we go from there. I might go kind of blues and the light greens and the purples, stuff like that. And yeah, just going to do it completely by feel. So we've got out our first one, the blue, and I'm just going to drop it. As you can see, I've got the bike set up in the work stand in a horizontal orientation. Why is this not dropping out? So grab the first color, which is this blue here, but judging by the fact that the ink comes almost to the end of the nozzle and not out, I think there's a little tiny pinhole that I need to put in the top of this first. Okay, so we've got the first color out, which is this blue. I've actually just cut the very tip of the nozzle off with some stolen floristry shears. So let's get dripping. I don't know how well this is going to flow. It looks like it's going to flow pretty well, but I actually haven't sanded down this frame. So I'm going to let it kind of run. You can see the frame has been laid horizontally in the work stand, so I can kind of move it around a bit and keep it relatively flat. Let's give this a bit of a shot and see how we go with the compressor. Okay, set to 60 psi, which means absolutely nothing in this instance. So that is having exactly the sort of effect that I was intending. So it's kind of moving it around. It's giving this little kind of splash and inconsistent sort of colorway. So that's pretty sweet. I'm going to just keep going with a few other drops, and then I'm going to move on to another color actually and get all of these to kind of work together. So I'll pop the blue away, and I'm going to get something to contrast nicely with it. So I'm going to get out this light purple here, you see. Let's chuck that on as well. So again, I'll just cut the tip. Ooh, into your jokes now. All right, just the tip, and let's get this light purple on. So I saw this a couple of months ago, and I'm actually trying to remember if I even saw it in the guise of painting a bike frame. But I just went, oh, that looks really cool, because when you add it all together, you get this really like kaleidoscopic effect. And it just looks like everything is going to be a one of one. You know, like you couldn't replicate the way in which the ink will move or anything like that over and over. So let's get the compressor on. So I think you just basically keep adding and adding and adding to it as time goes on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to chuck this on a time lapse, and I'm going to speed run a couple of the different colors, and then hopefully we'll kind of see it kind of come together really, rather than bit by bit. So let's get into that. Maybe before we jump into a time lapse, let's throw a bit of a double header down. So we got the light green and the red, and I'm just going to like drip, drip, drip. Doesn't really matter if they overrun with each other. That's all going to be part and parcel of the overall look. And really, the reason behind this, if you look back to the previous video, it was a really terrible paint job that was done to it, and I'm not saying that this is going to be any better, but what I did want to do is have something that was basically uniquely my own, because the paint job had been done by the previous owner. I didn't like it. It was just this flat, quite brilliant green, but it wasn't for me. So at least by doing it this way, I've got my own kind of look to things. So right, let's go time lapse and get into this. So I think what you've seen on the time lapse there is that you want to get quite a bit of ink down in order to then blow it around, right? You're kind of looking almost for full coverage. So I'm going to break out the orange and the pink now. And instead of doing drop, drop, drop everywhere necessarily, I'm also just going to kind of freestyle it a little bit more, because I think what that's going to do is going to give a little bit more of a well, one, full coverage, but also it just allows the ink to run in different manners, so you can get quite a bit of it on. And also, you know, let's call a spade here, it's going to take a hell of a lot less time as well to do this. So you can lash it on any which way. The pink is really pops quite a lot. I definitely don't want to go ham on one side, because of course I also have to do the other side. But what I might do is take this opportunity then to pivot the frame slightly and get more of the runs kind of going a bit more vertical. So I'll move the camera around. So you can see the sort of effect that that's having now with those colors down, and you're just kind of letting it run down the tubing. It might be actually slightly easier to go up the tubing. And I have no idea how this will eventually look, but it will be uniquely mine. So at the end of the day, if you go back to previous videos, a galloping horse might have thought it looked okay, but when you got up close to it, like the previous owner had painted clean over the DMR head tube badge, it was on super thick, so it just really didn't look great. I think this could look really cool. I'm then going to put the DMR graphics on under the clear coat, because I am going to clear coat this, and I've heard as well that sometimes it's recommended to actually go and sand it prior to clear coating it. So moving the frame around to get all different sort of angles, but you can see it's starting to come together in this kind of mad wash effect. So I'll keep moving the frame in the work stand to continuously, I guess, develop, for want of a better word, this color scheme, and then I'll flick it around and I'll do the far side. What's also nice, can't really see there too well, totally clean, so no gloves, which is nice, because obviously spray painting, even when I did the primer, you know, you've wrecked the whole garage and you're coughing up a lung. I think by moving the frame around in different orientations, aside from the fact that you can get different angles of flow, for want of a better word, I think the other thing it helps you do is it helps you see the gaps that you still have, because as you know, when you're kind of sanding or painting a bike, if you've ever done it, typically you do the job and then you go, oh great, I've missed this whole patch. And that was certainly the case when I did this with the primer even. And what I'm noticing is the flow rate for certain colors is way different. Like some of them just kind of hit the primer and they just streak off any which way, and others don't. They like kind of stick or adhere to it. So, and we can also shake the bottle, actually. That's quite nice. It's probably going over. I'm really glad I laid down a dust sheet. It's a rare moment for me of self-preservation and preparation. What's interesting, and you can't see it yet on the camera, is that it actually looks quite cool on the flip side of it, because it's just obviously just purely running across the frame. So according to the technology in the Cyclus A2 Pro electric pump, this frame is now inflated. So I'm going to try in a moment to flick it around so you can actually see the other side. What I might do is make life easy on myself. I'm going to take it out of the tripod and I'll just bring you around. So you can see there, you got this, like a geography teacher would froth on that sort of tributary estuary type of orientation. I really like this, actually. This is quite cool here. So really, if I were to give you an example of exactly what I'm looking for, it's kind of this, right? So it's this where they all kind of merge together and creates this quite cool effect. You can see this kind of like lemon lime, and they all just kind of start working together. So I think it's definitely, you can see versus up here where there's less ink, it's definitely a cumulative process. But I think when I flick the frame around and I do the other side, I think I'll get the inverse effect where I'll get streams kind of running through this. But so far, so good. So let's keep at it. Okay, so I think this is obviously the non-drive side, and it's been, suffering from a lot of these runs just coming from the other side. So I need to find a way to flick the frame around to really do it properly, because otherwise we're going to end up with one side of the frame looking a certain way, and the other side looking very different. So you can see on the off side, where there's been a lot more of these runs, we've got much more of a uniform sort of pattern emerging, which I can't say honestly I'm kind of mad into. I wanted more kind of splooshing together, whatever the technical term for that is. So now that I've got it on the flat, I'm going to keep going at it, and I might drop and use the pump at the same time, try and get a little bit more control over prior to it drying, curing, whatever. Let's see how that goes. So that's definitely getting me closer to what I want. I've found that you can obviously move the needle up and down the tubing, you can kind of shake it, whatever else, but actually what I found was good was taking the time to actually push the ink around specifically where you want it to go, which ends up giving me much more of this kind of marble effect I was kind of looking for. When the colors do start to blend, it does become a little bit more organic looking, and you get less of the brilliance of each individual color, which I'm kind of neither for or against at this current moment. However, what I figure, and I am no artist, is that I can use more of the light colors to lift it if I feel it's going a little bit too dark. And I can also leave the primer underneath, which is obviously white, to do a little bit of that heavy lifting. Now, the pump, this is obviously not what it's intended for, but it's done a really admirable job. And I would say, in terms of can it do this particular task? Absolutely. However, it does need to be recharged, and it's damn hot. That's why they come in these little silicone cases. Don't touch the needle. So yeah, I'm going to pop it on charge, give it a little bit of breathing space, and I might just take stock of this situation for a few moments and then I'll return. So I flip it over and I find out I've got this massive run now going down the middle of the top and the down tube on the drive side. So given that the pump is up there precariously sitting on top of a pedal wrench and charging, I decided I'd do this a little bit more au natural. And I will say that's not too bad. Now, it probably has a concerning level of saliva in it, but it's doing a job. But I like how this has come together. I like the merging of the colors. I'm definitely going to start really more heavily ladening on the bright colors to make sure that they super stand out. My understanding is as well with alcohol ink, if anything you want to change after the fact before clear coat goes on, you can just get a small paintbrush and isopropyl alcohol and you can move it around with that. So there's a pretty broad range of safety, I would say, with this approach. Okay, so there's ink pretty much all over my floor. Really, really glad for the dust sheet. Okay, so thoughts midway through, learnings, etc. Oddly on the camera, it looks a little brighter than it does in reality. I think this area has moved too far away from what I was ideally going for. I was kind of looking more for this. I think what's caused this is actually applying too much ink so that it's actually kind of created like flows and streams based on gravity. So I've tried to, I've obviously blown it around in places, but what I've tried to do then is just strategically just dot some like yellows and pinks in places. I'm also not thrilled about how much brown is being created by mixing of colors. I am going to reserve judgment for when it's actually fully completed. And like I said, I had no real vision for this, but I did want it to be colorful. Now, the DMR graphics that I have are obviously straight up black. So I think when they go on, it will pop a little bit more. But I definitely would rather it be brighter prior to them going on. The drive side to non-drive side, as expected, weirdly enough, the non-drive side is actually, in my opinion, looking a little better, even though it certainly got the less attention. There goes a fucking track pump as usual. But we will return to this a little bit later on when pumps are fully charged and whatnot. And like I said, we can always correct things. I don't know how much we can correct entire color palettes though. So no real mega worries right now, but intrigued to say the least. And of course, it goes without saying, if you are interested in this sort of thing, this is obviously a total learning experience with very little research done. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you think I've just made a bad situation even worse, or maybe I'm just a tortured genius. I guess we'll soon find out. Don't think this has really turned out the way I expected. So throughout the week, I've been coming down and I've been kind of doing little bits to the rear triangle. This isn't the look that I was going for. However, relatively speaking, I actually don't think it looks too bad. I'm going to show you like the main tubing, which was what I was really going for. And remember, I was kind of looking for that kind of kaleidoscopic effect. And what's happened now is something that looks a little bit more like abstract art, which I wasn't going for. So I'm going to try and do this with the lighting correctly. But you see this browning. So colors that have run together and created a brown has really dulled the frame. You can see where I've come and added additional like dots of pinks and purples and apple greens and stuff to try and lift it. I actually mistakenly think that I thought orange would help the situation. In hindsight, I think it's potentially made it worse because I think the orange turns a little bit too easily to a rust, to a brown. So there's still sections that are really good. Then you got sections that are like really faint, like on here. But again, you can see this mottled brownness, which just dulls everything down. So I'm a little bit pissed about that, to be honest. I'm going to see what I can do to kind of brighten it. I've actually considered taking out the isopropyl alcohol and seeing if I can some way like kind of almost scrub the frame. And if not, I might just persist as is. I guess it's just going to look a little bit more like shitty alleyway graffiti than it will do what I originally wanted. Because even the areas that were a bit more representative of what I wanted, as more colors have added, you can see that they've all gone the way of dulling rather than brightening. And it's only really like the pinks and a couple of other colors. Even the yellow doesn't stand out much. So yeah, not really that thrilled, but I may just persist and keep going with it and actually tack on the graphics and clear code it and see how it looks when it's all built, because who knows, it'll certainly look unique, but it's just not the look I was going for, so I'm a little bit annoyed. And so I think part of the issue and part of my learning so far, you can maybe see here, see that separation? So down the bottom of the bottle, down here near my little finger, where it's tapping, that's where the actual pigment is. And then you can see the alcohol above it, right? So if I shake this, it mixes, okay? You still have a really low viscosity. But I think the issue is that the different colors have different viscosities. And what I noticed is you'll put some on like a red and it'll kind of stick. And this is almost kind of what I wanted. But then you'll put on some other colors and they just run straight away. So you got to be quick out of the blocks with the pump to try and move it around. And it has just become a little bit more graffiti-esque rather than that kaleidoscopic effect that I was going for. Look, it's the first time I've tried this, so we're all learning together, and I guess there is value in that, and there's certainly a uniqueness to it. But I'm a little disappointed that I felt there was a point whereby I was getting closer to what I wanted, and then I went past that point, and I think I cut a few corners in terms of putting on like too much ink, just kind of streaking it and kind of whipping it all over, and that actually resulted then in runs forming and all that sort of stuff. And initially I was like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. But then as it's dried, it's dulled, and now I just don't think it looks quite as good as I had imagined it would. And that's why I think the rear triangle starts to look a little better by contrast. But let's see how we go anyway. All's not lost. There's actually another DMR Sidekick inside. Apparently, I just had an absence attack there and forgot how a work stand worked. So you can probably see it a little bit better now, because this is actually how the frame would look in the orientation that you would see it in. And okay, on camera, maybe it doesn't look too bad, but to me, this annoys me. This browniness, you can see it there all throughout. There's just a dullness that persists, and this is the kind of cool thing that I wanted up here. And weirdly enough, the top tube seems to have it, but the down tube seems to have lost it. I probably got a little bit too, pardon the Irish phrase here, flahulach with throwing on the ink. But let's see if I can salvage this somewhat. And if not, I think I'll just move on to the rear triangle and just focus on that. I think this side, which is the non-drive side, is actually somewhat better, which is oddly because I didn't focus on it as much, and actually it was mainly painted by virtue of the runs created from the drive side. So it's all a bit bizarro anyway. But I'm going to do a little bit more on the drive side. I'm going to try and see if I can clean this up. I've got out the isopropyl alcohol. I've chucked some of it into a very appropriate little steel mug here, and I'm going to dab and see if I can just brighten it a little bit, because if I can remove section by section, I should be able to replace it with something a little bit brighter. So let's see how we go. So I've put the cloth into my isopropyl. I mean, it certainly takes it off, but the irony is it's actually taking off the bits that I probably want to keep, and it's leaving the bits that I want gone. However, if nothing else, it is brightening it somewhat, so maybe it can do a job. Probably should have put on gloves before this, so we're putting on gloves after the fact. All right, give me a rag. All right, let's see if we can get this section here to brighten up a bit. So, isopropyl in. Try and stay out of the vapor cloud. Okay, so it's washing it out a little bit, but it's actually making it. Maybe it's just the gloss, and this is something I have to bear in mind: is that by putting on the isopropyl alcohol, it makes it wet, it makes it shiny, which then inherently gives me a better indication of what it'll look like once it's been clear coated. So it actually looks that bit better because it doesn't have that inherent dullness that I've been trying to avoid. I still think that this needs more lightening by virtue of the actual color, but this is somewhat promising, so that's good. I'm happy that it seems to have, again, as I've said earlier in the video, I think because of your ability to amend it with isopropyl alcohol after the fact, it does mean that you can, change it and make it a little bit more in keeping with what you'd originally planned. So that's good. So with that slight bit of promise that's just come back into things, I'm going to take pink because that's like the brightest. I'm a big fan of the color pink. But I think that will go the furthest in terms of lifting the overall color and brightness of the frame. It's also got that viscosity that I mentioned earlier, whereby it actually can run and you can move it around with relative ease. So I'm going to drip on a little bit, give it a bit of a blow, and I'm going to get the pump down now and give it a bit of a blast. So we get out the old Psych Plus A2 Pro. Okay, cool. So, as I said, this has all been a big learning experience. I'm feeling a lot better about it now, and just the pink kind of falling into these like cracks and crevices. You can see here, just having this little run here just creates a little bit of a visual cue, and I actually really like the way the top tubes come out. I wish I knew how I could replicate that elsewhere, but such is life. I'm gonna plug away on a time lapse here on the rear triangle. I think I'm gonna leave the front end almost broadly alone. You have to remember that there's going to be a DMR decal running up here as well. So I don't want to focus on areas that currently look like a large part of real estate, but in reality are going to be pretty minor. So I'm going to do the rear triangle now, and then I am going to basically let it dry in the sun and then hit it with some clear. Okay, we're going to speed run the whole rear triangle, and we're going to do it pump and ink in hand, and pretty much just...
What did he say?
So I am going to call the ball. I'm going to say that is the main bulk of the frame done. What I am going to do now is spend a little bit of time trying to get into these more intricate areas that get often overlooked, because ultimately this is going to get clear coated. I'm actually going to leave the rear triangle a little bit lighter on. Like I said, it's not the end of the world, but it does create a little bit of a, like, it's kind of heavy and then it kind of fades to a little bit more bitty, for want of a better word. But yeah, I'm going to do these sort of sections that I've just not had the frame in any real orientation in order to hit. And then I'm going to call it, and I'm going to let it dry, and I'm going to apply decals and clear. Kind of using the work stand in such a bizarre manner, you kind of have to remember how things move and the different axes of trying to rarely ever have a bike quite flat in a work stand. But at least I can now access the areas I need to access. So I can get right up under the collar. And you see, like that, you give it a bit of an initial blow when you put it on. And that seems to obviously thin it out, whereby it has a little bit more propensity to adhere and not run everywhere. Still runs, but not nearly to the same degree. So that's a little bit of purple. Chuck on a bit of pink. Pink and purple just goes so well together, especially with the kind of turquoise, teal, aquamarine, whatever you want to call it. But one thing, and it's happening right now, that I've learned through this process is putting on too much ink has this cumulative effect whereby it becomes much harder to control, because it ultimately is all alcohol, it's just different pigment. So it'll end up just adding up, and then you end up in a situation whereby it's flowing. So it's a case of having a degree of discipline This is all very brown, and I don't like it. So I'm going to try a marginally different approach. I'm going to take paintbrush and the isopropyl. See if I can just affect any change here, just to get a little bit less. Like, it just looks so unintentional. It looks like something that has happened, not something that you intended to happen. Wow, that strips right through the primer. Okay, we're going to stop doing that. That's a problem. Oh, shit. That has just taken a big swathe of primer off it. Which, okay, it's going to be clear coated anyway, so it's actually not a bad thing to have a little bit of metal poking through. Some of the unintended consequences of me learning this on the fly are positive and others are negative. But let's just leave it be. Cool, leaving it there.